Here are the topics that will be covered in the Congress revision videos. This video will focus on the legislative process.
Now that we have an understanding of the committee system in Congress, we can focus on the legislative process. This process takes place in Congress is best thought of in 6 stages. Introduction, committee stage, timetabling, floor debate and vote, conference committee, and presidential action. To be successful, all bills must pass through stages 1 to 4 and 6. Stage 5, the conference committee, may be avoided if both houses pass the bill in the same form or if any differences can be resolved informally without the need for a committee. To be successful, a bill must pass through all these stages during a Congress, which is 2 years. Any bills that are not completed within one stage of Congress must start all over again at the beginning of the next Congress. Before I go through the legislation process, pause the video here and test yourself to see what you can remember what happened at each stage. The introduction of a bill is a formality. There is no debate or vote. Anyone can come up with the idea for a bill. It comes from the executive branch or maybe an interest group or even members of the public. Once the idea has formed, a member of either the House or the Senate can introduce the bill. In the Senate, the introduction involves reading out the title of the bill on the Senate floor. Bills are then numbered, printed, circulated, and sent on to the appropriate standing committees. The most important fact to remember at this stage of the process is the volume of legislation that is introduced in Congress. The table on the screen shows you a typical Congress in session, where anything from 10,000 to 14,000 bills are introduced. Of this, only 2 to 4% actually become law. The committee stage is the most important stage of the legislation process. Far more bills die here than at any other stage. Hundreds of bills are referred to each of the standing committees in both chambers of Congress. This is far more than they can handle. A significant number of bills are put to one side with no action taken on them at all. It is only bills with a good deal of support from either members of Congress, the White House, the administration, or interest groups that get hearings. Another reason why the committee stage is so important is that it comes very early in the legislative process. The full House and Senate have not debated on the bill yet. The standing committee members are regarded as policy specialists and they have the full power of amendment, so they can add or remove anything that they want. Once hearings have been completed, the committee holds a markup session where they make the changes that they want before sending the bill out to the next stage. The report written by the committee does 4 things. It states the main aims of the bill, reviews amendments made by the committee, estimates the cost of implementation, and recommends future action to be taken by the full chamber. By the time Congress has been in session for a few months, a huge number of bills will be waiting to come to the floor of both houses for debate and vote. There is only one floor in each house. This is where legislative traffic jams can develop as bills are queuing for their turn on the House and Senate floors, as each house has its own procedure for dealing with this problem. The Senate deals with this through unanimous consent agreement, which is where an agreement is made in either the House or the Senate, and the agreement is made without objection to waiver the chamber's normal rules. This in effect creates an agreement between the Senate majority and minority leaders on the order in which bills will be debated on the Senate floor. The House of Representatives deals with its legislative traffic jam through the House Rules Committee. The prioritising role of the House Rules Committee means that it can allow some bills through and hold some bills back. If the House Rules Committee fails to give a rule to a popular bill, House members may use the discharge process, where a petition must be signed by an absolute majority of House members, which is 218. Once this requirement is met, the bill is discharged from the House Rules Committee and automatically goes to the next stage for debate. The next stage is the debating chamber. In the House, most bills are first considered at this stage, as it is the whole House that debates on the bill. In most Houses, further amendments can be made. Votes are taken on by both the amendment stage and the bill, and this is where simple majorities are required. During the debating stage in the Senate, there is a possibility of a filibuster taking place, which is where senators can exercise their right to unlimited debate to delay a bill. I will go into more detail about what a filibuster is and how to end one later on in the video. After the debate and the approval of any amendment, each chamber votes to either pass or defeat the bill, having come through the process in each house. The House version and the Senate version are likely to be different. If the differences are minor, then the two houses may just agree informally among the leadership to adjust the bills to make them identical. But if the differences are significant, then the conference committee may be set up to reconcile the differences. There are many differences between the legislative process in each chamber. In the House of Representatives, there is a 2-year term, which gives a greater sense of urgency compared to the Senate's 6-year terms. Also, the House of Representatives has House members who sit on one major committee assignment, meaning that they are more likely to be policy specialists, whereas senators often serve on 2 to 3 major committees, meaning they are more generalists. Also, the Senate's referral of bills to a standing committee is easier to challenge compared to the House of Representatives, which is done by the Speaker. The Senate also has no discharge process, which enhances standing committees' power to block bills, whilst the House of Representatives' discharge process limits the power of standing committees to refuse to report out a bill for consideration by the whole House. Timetabling at the House of Representatives is controlled by the majority party through the House Rules Committee, whereas in the Senate, timetabling from the committee stage to the floor is generally agreed upon between the majority and minority leaders. In the House of Representatives, all revenue bills have a second reading in the Committee of the Whole House, which is a similar procedure in the Senate. The Senate also has no limits on speeches, which allows for the opportunity for delay and filibustering, which is difficult to amend with the cloitre motion. Unlike the fact that the debate in the House of Representatives is usually limited to 1 hour and there is a strict limit on the length of speeches. The difference in size also affects the legislative process, as the House of Representatives has 435 members, meaning it is more difficult to keep a tally of likely voting intentions compared to the 100 members of the Senate, which is easier to keep a tally of. Finally, the Senate can, in the case of a tied vote on the final passage of a bill, can use the Vice President, who is President of the Senate, to use his casting vote, whereas the House of Representatives, if the vote is tied, then the bill is defeated. Once the bill reaches the President, they have 3 options as what they can do. Sometimes there is a 4th option. First, the President can sign the bill into law. They generally do this if they fully support the bill and want to get credit for it. An example of this is on March 2010 when Obama signed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. There is then a bill signing ceremony which is arranged as a press opportunity where there are some senators and House of Representatives present. Sometimes the President may choose to sign a bill out of political urgency. This happened in 2002 when President Bush signed the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. The second option a President has is they can decide to leave the bill on the desk. This often happens for bills in which the President has no position on at all, or some that they would like to veto, but know that the veto will be overridden. These bills will become law without the signature of the President in 10 working congressional days. This is significant because although the bill becomes law, it is not endorsed by the President. The third option a President has is the regular veto. This can be used for any bill that the President strongly opposes. A President may use the threat of a veto as a bargaining tool to get the changes made to the bill. The President has 10 working congressional days to use their veto. There is also an option of sending the bill back to its House of Origin with a message explaining the President's objections. However, when vetoing a bill, a President is vetoing the whole bill, not just parts of it. Congress has 3 options if the bill is sent back. They can correct the things the President objects to, or they can override the veto. However, this needs a 2/3 majority in both houses, something that is rarely achieved. Congress's third and final option is not to change the bill, realise that they do not have the option to override the veto, therefore they accept that the President has won and allow the veto to happen. This option happens the most often. From 1789 up until the end of Obama's presidency, Presidents have used the regular veto 1,508 times. and of those, only 11 have been overridden by Congress. This gives the President a 92% success rate. There are two main reasons for this. First, it is harder for the Senate to override the bill than it is for the President to veto a bill. Secondly, the President will often study the final passage of votes before he sees the bill. So if the bill has passed by a huge majority in both houses, the President is aware of how likely it will be for Congress to override them. Therefore, the veto will not be used. Or if the majorities of the passing bill are quite small, the President knows he can use his veto in confidence. The fourth option that a President has is the pocket veto. If the bill is awaiting the President's action when the legislative session ends, then the bill is lost. This is a pocket veto and it cannot be overridden by Congress. A late rush of bills may arrive on the President's desk just as the legislative season ends, so this can be a very significant power. President Clinton was the last president to use a pocket veto on the Consumer Bankruptcy Overhaul Bill in 2007. These are all the stages a bill must pass through in order to become a law. Before we look at the effectiveness of the legislation process, let's look a bit deeper into what a filibuster is. A filibuster is an action, such as a prolonged speaking, which obstructs progress in the Legislative Assembly in a way that does not technically contravene the required procedures. This happens at the floor debate and voting stages of the legislative process. A filibuster can only be exercised by the Senate. There are no time limits set on speeches made for or against a bill. A filibuster usually occurs when a member on the majority side of the bill forces the death of a bill by talking until the end of the allotted time that the bill has. It is generally considered the case that no vote can be taken if any senator still wants to speak, so the minority side can talk the bill to death. Filibusters are used to slow down or block legislation. Here are some famous filibusters. The longest filibuster in history came when US Senator Strom Thurmond spoke from 8:54 on the 28th of August 1957 up until about 9:15 the following evening against the civil rights reforms. US Senator Alfonso DiMatteo, he's on the left on the screen, he was a senator from New York. He kept going for 23 hours and 30 minutes in an attempt to block a military bill in 1986. Robert Byrd, in the center of the screen, was a senator from West Virginia who spoke against the 1964 Civil Rights Act for 14 hours and 13 minutes. Huey Long, on the right on the screen, was a senator from Louisiana who discussed the merits of various recipes during his 15-hour filibuster in 1935. Senator Ted Cruz also filibustered in 2013 for 21 hours on the Affordable Care Act, which is the fourth longest filibuster. During this time, he read many works by Dr. Seuss. Filibustering seems like a crazy idea, but there is a way to end them. A filibuster can be ended by a cloitre. To be successful, a cloitre petition must be signed by 16 senators, and then it is voted upon by at least 3/5 of the Senate, which is 60 members. Up until the 1970s, filibusters and cloitre motions were relatively unusual events. For example, in the 91st Congress, which ran from 1969 to 1970, there was only 7 cloitre motions, with 6 of them being voted on. Compare that to the 110th Congress of 2007 to 2008, where a record 139 cloitre motions were presented, with 112 being voted on. Because the filibuster was becoming increasingly common and a huge problem in slowing down the legislative process, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell reached a deal in 2013 to try and limit the number of filibusters. However, initially this had no effect. Later on in the same year, the Senate Democrats passed what is referred to as the nuclear option, which requires a simple majority vote to end filibusters happening during executive and judicial branch nominations. However, this does not include nominations to the Supreme Court. When Republicans returned to the majority of the Senate in 2015, they kept this reform. Then, in 2017, in order to secure the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, the Senate rules were changed again, this time by the Republicans, which forbids the filibustering on Supreme Court nominations.
There is a common saying that the cards are stacked against Congress, meaning that they often face difficult odds in order to get legislation passed. There are 7 reasons why so little legislation gets passed in Congress. Pause the video here and test yourself on what those 7 reasons are. Firstly, a vast number of bills are introduced. This immediately makes the process crowded. The process itself is complicated. Professor Denberg described the process as the legislative labyrinth. There is a need at some stages for a supermajority, or in the case of a filibuster, a 3/5 majority. Power in Congress is decentralised. Most power resides within the standing committees, especially those who chair them. There is the fact that both houses possess equal power, which makes the process more difficult. And between 1981 and 1987, and from June 2001 to December 2002, as well as January 2011 to January 2015, these equal houses were controlled by different parties, making it harder to work together. Finally, there is the fact that even if both houses are controlled by the same party, it may not be the president's party, thereby making it difficult to pass the legislation the president wants. Other factors that affect Congress effectiveness is the fact that there are so many places where a bill can die. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So a bill can die if the Speaker or Majority Leader refuses to send it to the committee can kill it by not voting for it, a committee can vote but it might not get a majority, which then kills the bill, the Senate leadership can refuse to schedule a vote on it, a senator can filibuster, the House Rules Committee can kill a bill by not providing the rules for the debate. The House can also recommit a bill back to the committee stage, which signals that the bill should be dropped or changed significantly. It dies if it doesn't get a majority in the House or the Senate, or it could die even as a compromise bill. The presidential veto kills a bill. Collectively, all of these areas where a bill can die are known as veto gates. Veto gates are largely uninteresting legislative procedures, so they don't attract much media attention. Other important things to remember about the legislative process. 3% of all bills are vetoed by presidents. 4% of vetoes overridden, often for political reasons, happen in divided government. Very few bills put forward become law. In fact, it's between 4 to 5%. Weak party discipline means votes are not predictable. Committees can kill off or fundamentally change a bill. The cloitre motion requirement in the Senate means that majorities can kill a bill. And it's supposed to be difficult to pass laws. Congress has a reputation for being inefficient, but there's a strong case that it was designed to be that way from the beginning. There are many strengths and weaknesses of this complicated legislative process. Pause the video here and draw a table listing all the strengths and weaknesses that you can think of. Add to your table with the ones that I go through now. Let's start with strengths. Checks and balances prevents tyranny. It forces a compromise between different interests. In this sense, the United States creates a pluralist democracy in which power is shared. Everyone gets the chance to view or create a bill. The quality of policy comes from the detailed consideration of bills, and this removes undesirable aspects from being passed. This limits the danger of a bill being poorly thought through. Individual and state rights are protected, as senators can insert amendments or filibuster on the basis of their equal state of power and interest. Now let's look at the weaknesses. The inefficiency and low output often results in the excessive need to compromise. Congress cannot act quickly and often fails to agree on legislation to address key needs. Think about the Civil Rights Act and how long that took to be passed. High levels of bipartisanship mean that parties are unwilling to compromise, which leads to gridlock. The Constitution requires compromise for laws to be passed. Poor quality legislation can come from too many compromises. A bill may lack coherence due to the many amendments and interests that have been made. Prevalent pork barreling can also create financially wasteful policy that is not based on rational decisions.